The restaurant was buzzing with activity, as it always did on weekends. Waiters hurried back and forth carrying trays stacked with sparkling glasses and plates of carefully prepared food. The air smelled of roasted meat, fresh bread, and just a hint of expensive perfume from the guests. Most of the people here didn't notice the small details of the room, the worn wooden floor under the waiter's shoes, the faded scuff on the edge of the stage, but she noticed everything. Every little sound, every small movement, every hurried laugh. She had worked here for months, moving quietly among the crowd, carrying drinks and clearing tables with a smile while keeping her head down. She knew her place, or at least that's what everyone else assumed. The wealthy guests were all in their own world talking about business deals, the latest fashion, or the newest luxury cars. They had no idea who she really was. No idea that the quiet waitress with her apron tucked neatly around her waist had spent years dreaming about a life completely different from this one. She had always loved music. From the moment she could remember, the sound of a piano had been her favorite thing in the world. At home, she had nothing but a small keyboard, worn down from years of practice, but it had been enough to teach her the magic of music. She could sit for hours, playing the same song over and over, losing herself completely in the melodies. It wasn't about showing anyone how good she was, at least not yet. It was about the way the music made her feel. The way it could make the world feel a little softer, a little brighter, but life had a way of keeping dreams on hold. Her days were filled with work-long hours carrying heavy trays, wiping tables, dealing with impatient guests who thought the world owed them something. The nights were spent in a small, cramped apartment, where she would finally sit at her keyboard and let her fingers move freely. It was the only place where she felt truly herself, the only place where she could breathe. And sometimes, late at night, she imagined what it would feel like to play in front of a crowd. Not just anyone, but people who could appreciate the music, people who might actually listen. Tonight was no different. She had been serving the gala all evening, moving between the glittering tables and the stage, watching the performers with a mix of admiration and longing. There was an energy in the room, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It was a mix of excitement, nerves, and a little bit of fear. She could see the way the guests laughed and clinked their glasses, and she felt invisible, like a shadow moving along the edges of the room. And yet, in her heart, she knew that music was her chance. Her way to step out of that shadow and into something bigger. The gala was one of the most prestigious events of the season, attended by people who had everything they could ever want: wealth, influence, and power. They were used to being entertained by professional musicians, people who had trained their whole lives to perform on grand stages. She didn't belong here. At least, that's what she had always told herself. And yet, as she walked past the grand piano sitting in the middle of the room, polished and shining under the chandelier lights, she felt a strange pull in her chest. She imagined the keys beneath her fingers, the music flowing out of her in waves that could fill the entire room. She shook her head slightly, pushing the thought away. It was just a dream, she told herself. Dreams were dangerous things. They made you feel alive, but they also reminded you how far away the real world was. Still, there was a spark of hope in her that she couldn't ignore. Every now and then, one of the guests would glance at her and make a little joke. Assuming she was just a servant, someone whose role was to smile and pour drinks, someone who would never dare to dream beyond the apron around her waist. Some nights, the teasing was light, almost friendly, but tonight it felt different. One of the hosts, laughing loudly, called out to her, teasingly asking if she could play the piano. The guests around him laughed, thinking it was a harmless joke. A waitress playing at a gala? The idea seemed almost funny. Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment she froze, unsure if she should respond. The thought of standing in front of all those people, of exposing herself in a world where she felt so small, was terrifying. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the tray she was carrying, and she forced herself to take a deep breath. She tried to convince herself to just ignore it, to go back to clearing tables and pretending nothing had happened. That's what she always did. That's what she had always been told to do. But then, something inside her stirred, something that had been quietly growing for years. fueled by every late night at her keyboard. Every song played in the dark when no one was listening. She could feel all the eyes on her now, even though she wasn't sure she wanted them there. She could feel the laughter, the disbelief, the challenge in the air. And then she made a decision, small but powerful. She would do it. She would sit at the piano and play. It didn't matter if the guests expected her to fail. It didn't matter if they laughed or whispered or looked down on her. For once, she would step into her own power. Even if just for a few moments walking toward the piano, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each step a battle against fear and doubt. The polished keys glimmered under the lights, and she placed her hands lightly on them, feeling the smooth surface under her fingertips. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the room fill her, and then she began to play. The first notes were quiet, almost hesitant, like the first step of a journey into the unknown. But as her fingers moved, finding the rhythm and the flow, the music grew stronger, more confident. Each note carried a piece of her soul, every chord telling a story that words could never capture. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the laughter began to fade. Conversations hushed, and all eyes turned toward her. People who had never noticed her before were now leaning forward, drawn in by the beauty of what they were hearing. She didn't think about the crowd or the gala or the wealth around her. She thought only of the music, of the way it filled the room and wrapped around her like a warm embrace. She thought of all the nights she had spent alone at her keyboard, dreaming of this very moment. And she thought of every little doubt that had ever tried to stop her, and she pushed it all away with the strength of her playing. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt alive, powerful, and seen in a way she had never been before. The music was more than just sound, it was a statement, a declaration that talent and passion could not be ignored, no matter where they came from. And as the last notes of her first piece lingered in the air, she realized something incredible. The room was completely silent. Not a single person moved. Not a single person whispered. All the laughter and chatter had disappeared, replaced by something deeper, something that left everyone in awe. In that moment, she knew that her life had changed forever. The little waitress who had moved quietly among the elite guests had shown them something they had never expected. She had reminded them that talent could come from anywhere, that courage could break through even the highest walls of status and wealth, and she felt a thrill of hope, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that could take her far beyond the small world she had always known. The first part of her story didn't end with applause yet. That would come later. But in the quiet, in the way the room had suddenly paused, in the invisible energy that hummed between every guest and every note, she felt the power of her own potential. And that feeling, more than anything, was worth more than anything money could buy. The room was still buzzing from the earlier laughter, though now it had a different tone, more curious, more expectant. She stood by the grand piano, feeling the polished surface under her fingertips. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The sound of her own breathing seemed loud in the quiet room, but she tried to calm herself. One deep breath after another. She told herself, I can do this. I've done this in my apartment, alone, countless times. I can do it here too. The host, the man who had called her out earlier, laughed again, a little louder this time. He didn't know yet, but he was about to find out that appearances can be deceiving. Come on, he said, teasing. Let's see if you can actually play something other than chopsticks. The words were meant to embarrass her. And at first, she felt a flash of panic. What if she did fail? What if all those people laughed at her, just as they had been ready to do before? But then, she remembered the hours she had spent practicing in the silence of her small apartment, the nights she had poured every bit of herself into the music. She thought of the times she had played for herself when she had no audience, and yet had felt the music fill her soul in a way nothing else could. She sat down on the piano bench, and the room seemed to shift around her. The wealthy guests, some chatting and some on their phones, suddenly stopped what they were doing. Eyes turned toward her, some curious, some skeptical. Some leaned forward, as if leaning closer would help them see the truth hidden in her quiet presence. The laughter had gone, replaced by a strange tension in the air. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight of the challenge in front of her. She could hear the faint clinking of glasses and soft footsteps of the waiters moving about, but all that faded into the background as she focused on the music inside her head. She began with a soft, gentle melody, almost hesitant, as if testing the water. The notes were light, delicate, flowing like a stream over smooth rocks. She felt the room leaning into the sound, felt the energy of the audience pulling her forward rather than pushing her back. Slowly, the melody grew. Her fingers moved with confidence now, each note intentional, each chord filled with emotion. She poured every bit of herself into the music, letting her feelings guide her hands. It was no longer just about showing off talent. It was about telling a story through sound, a story that spoke of hope, courage, and the quiet strength of someone who had been overlooked for too long. She noticed the crowd changing before her eyes. The laughter that had been aimed at her turned into curiosity and then into awe. Faces that had been indifferent or mocking now displayed surprise, admiration, even wonder. Some guests exchanged glances as if silently asking each other, "Is this really happening?" A few older guests, seasoned in life and used to seeing it all, sat back in their chairs, their eyes wide, silently nodding in appreciation. Even the host, the one who had joked, leaned forward, a flicker of something unrecognizable passing across his face. He didn't know it yet, but he had just underestimated her in the worst way possible. The music wasn't just playing. It was speaking. It carried a story that no words could capture. The soft melancholy of the opening chords told of struggle and hardship, of nights spent alone with nothing but a keyboard and a dream. The crescendo spoke of courage, of a heart that refused to stay hidden in the shadows. And the gentle pauses, the spaces between the notes, spoke of hope, of a longing for recognition and a belief that one day, talent like hers would not go unnoticed. For a moment, she almost forgot where she was. She was no longer a waitress in an elite gala. She was a musician on a stage of her own making, sharing a piece of her soul with anyone willing to listen. And as she played, she realized something remarkable. People were listening. Not just casually, not out of politeness, but truly listening. Eyes followed her hands as they moved gracefully over the keys. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others sat perfectly still, caught in the spell of the notes that seemed to carry meaning far beyond the room. A young man sitting near the front, dressed in an expensive suit, held his breath as if he were afraid to break the magic. A woman beside him wiped a tear from her eye, quickly glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. And at the back of the room, a group of older gentlemen who were known for their sharp criticism exchanged surprised looks, shaking their heads in disbelief. They had come expecting entertainment, perhaps a joke, but what they were witnessing was something entirely different, something real. Authentic and impossible to ignore, the host finally spoke, almost involuntarily. "She's good," he muttered under his breath. The words were almost lost in the music, but they carried a weight of acknowledgement, a silent confession that he had misjudged her. And with that, a subtle shift occurred. The remaining skeptics in the room stopped fidgeting and turned their full attention toward her. They leaned forward in their seats, not wanting to miss a single note. It was as if the music had built an invisible bridge, connecting the audience to the performer in a way that social status, money, or laughter could never have achieved. She continued, letting her fingers glide over the keys. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the servers, who had moved about quietly at the edges of the room, paused to watch. The air was thick with emotion, almost electric, as if everyone there knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. And she felt it too, the connection, the energy, the realization that this one moment could change everything. A melody that started softly now rose with intensity, each note building upon the last, telling a story of resilience and quiet determination. She thought about the countless times she had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. She thought about every person who had doubted her abilities, every comment that had tried to make her feel small. And with each note, she transformed that doubt into beauty, turning every ounce of fear into a song that demanded to be heard. The audience, once ready to scoff, now sat entranced. There was a collective recognition in the room that talent does not belong to any one class. That passion cannot be measured by clothing, background, or occupation. The music had broken through all of their assumptions, all of their judgments, leaving only honesty, vulnerability, and awe. She didn't stop to look at anyone in particular. She didn't need to. She could feel the attention, the wonder, the quiet respect radiating through the room. Every movement of her hands was precise yet free, controlled yet filled with emotion. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a voice for every dream she had ever held close, every hope she had ever whispered to herself in the darkness of her tiny apartment. Minutes passed like seconds, and yet the music continued to flow naturally, effortlessly. She had reached a point where she was no longer thinking about impressing anyone or proving herself. She was simply letting the music come, letting it tell its own story. And the audience responded in kind, drawn into a world they had not expected. Feeling emotions they had not anticipated, the host finally leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The initial teasing, the jokes, the laughter, all of it seemed so distant now, replaced by something more genuine. He had thought this would be amusing, a small moment of entertainment at the expense of a humble waitress. Instead, he had been confronted with authenticity, talent, and courage, all wrapped in the sound of a piano played with the heart. As the final notes of her piece lingered in the air, the room remained silent. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the clinking of glasses seemed paused, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And in that silence she felt a quiet victory, a sense of triumph that had nothing to do with applause or recognition, but everything to do with owning the moment and standing in her truth. She finally lifted her hands from the keys, the echo of the last note vibrating through the room. Slowly, the audience began to react, not with forced claps or polite murmurs, but with genuine astonishment. A ripple of applause spread across the room, growing louder as people realized what they had just witnessed. Some were standing, some were wiping tears discreetly, and others were simply nodding as if to themselves, acknowledging that they had underestimated her in every possible way. In that moment, she understood something profound. This wasn't just about the piano, or the performance, or even the audience. It was about courage, the courage to step forward, to take a chance, to defy expectations, and to embrace who she really was, no matter how small or unnoticed she had felt before. And in embracing that courage, she had given everyone in the room a gift far greater than entertainment, a reminder that real talent and real beauty often come from the most unexpected places. The room remained quiet, though it was no longer the tense, expectant silence from before. Now it was a silence filled with wonder, a silence that seemed to wrap itself around the piano and the young woman sitting at it. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, not with fear this time, but with awareness. They were watching, waiting, listening, because they could sense that what was happening was something rare and extraordinary. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment, remembering the countless nights she had spent alone, teaching herself to play, learning to feel the music instead of just hitting the right notes. Every hour of practice, every moment of self-doubt, every time she had told herself she wasn't ready, had led to this exact moment. And now, as she began again, the music was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation, a connection with every person in that room, a story told without words. The first notes of her next piece were soft and hesitant, like the morning light filtering through curtains. They were gentle but deliberate, each one carrying a subtle emotion that made the listeners lean in without realizing it. The sound was different this time. It wasn't just a melody, it was a message. It spoke of the journey of someone who had worked hard, who had struggled, who had dared to dream despite every obstacle. It was personal, honest, and impossible to ignore. She closed her eyes as she played, feeling the music flow through her, feeling the air around the piano vibrate with the sound. She didn't need to see the audience to know they were listening. She could feel their attention, their curiosity turning into admiration. The faint shifting of chairs, the held breath. The way even the busiest people had stopped what they were doing, it was all evidence that the music was working, that it was reaching them in ways words never could dot as the piece progressed. She let her fingers move faster, more confidently. The soft, gentle melody grew richer, layered with emotion. There were moments of light, playful notes that danced across the keys, making the audience smile even without realizing why. There were moments of slow, powerful chords that seemed to resonate with the heart, filling the room with a deep sense of connection. Each section of the piece told a part of her story, her struggles, her hope, her courage, and her unshakable belief in herself. The host, who had started the evening by mocking her, now sat in stunned silence. His laughter was gone, replaced by something that looked very much like respect. He leaned slightly forward, as if trying to absorb every note, and for the first time, it was clear that he understood he had underestimated her completely. Around the room, the reactions were the same. People were shifting in their seats, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, and some wiping away quiet tears. No one moved to speak, no one whispered to break the spell of the music. She felt her own emotions rising, but she did not let them control her. Instead, she used them to guide her playing. Each note became a reflection of what she had been through. Each chord a declaration of the strength that had carried her to this moment. The audience could feel it too. They could sense the honesty, the vulnerability, and the passion in every sound. And in that feeling they were captivated, and the piece began to build to its climax. The music became more intense, more powerful, but never harsh. Every note, every chord was perfectly placed, leading the listeners on a journey they hadn't expected to take. Some people leaned back, overwhelmed by the beauty and the emotion, while others sat perfectly still, holding their breath, afraid to break the magic. She could sense the energy in the room changing, shifting from polite curiosity to genuine awe. The laughter and skepticism that had once surrounded her were gone. Replaced by admiration and a kind of reverent silence, she imagined all the people who had doubted her. All the moments when she had been told she wasn't good enough or didn't belong. And with each note, she transformed those moments into music. She let the pain, the frustration, and the determination pour out through her fingers. And the audience felt it. They felt every struggle, every triumph, every ounce of courage that had led her here. The music was more than notes on a page. It was a story of perseverance, of believing in oneself, and of daring to step forward when no one else expects you to. A few guests exchanged glances, clearly moved beyond words. Some were leaning forward, some were leaning back, trying to process what they were hearing. The older guests, experienced and perhaps harder to impress, had their eyes wide, nodding slowly, a silent acknowledgement of the talent in front of them. The younger guests, who might have been more dismissive at first, were now captivated, watching every move of her hands as if learning something from the way she expressed herself. The music softened for a moment, and in that silence between the powerful notes, she could hear the subtle reactions of the audience, the faint gasps, the quiet sighs, the sound of people holding back tears. It was in that pause that she realized something important. She had not only captured their attention, she had touched their hearts. The crowd that had once been indifferent or mocking was now connected to her story, connected to the power of music and courage. She closed her eyes again, letting the music guide her. The final section of the piece was a blend of everything she had poured into it so far. It was strong, confident, and full of emotion. It was a celebration of not only her talent but also her journey. She played with freedom now, letting the music flow without holding back, letting every note carry a piece of herself into the room. She felt alive in a way she had never felt before, fully in the moment. Fully herself, the audience responded in ways she could feel even without looking. There was a subtle energy, a ripple of emotion that passed through the room. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was respect, recognition, and perhaps even inspiration. People were seeing what was possible when someone refuses to be limited by their circumstances. They were seeing that talent, passion, and determination could come from anywhere. Even from someone they had dismissed moments ago. She opened her eyes briefly, glancing at the faces around her. There was a woman wiping a tear quietly, a man sitting upright with a look of astonishment, and several people who had begun to clap softly, almost tentatively, as if unsure they were allowed to break the spell. And then the clapping grew louder, spreading across the room like a wave. It started small, polite, and then it became undeniable. A full, heartfelt applause that shook the room with energy and appreciation. The host, who had been the first to mock her, was clapping now too, a look of astonishment and respect on his face. He had clearly realized that he had underestimated her, and the pride and admiration in his eyes were unmistakable. She did not look for approval, but the acknowledgement was a sweet confirmation of what she had already known. She was capable of greatness. And she had proven it here, in front of the very people who had doubted her. The applause continued, and she felt a sense of triumph unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't about fame or money or recognition. It was about being seen for who she truly was, about sharing her gift in a way that moved people, about breaking through barriers that had once held her back. She realized that this moment was not just a turning point for her career, but for her confidence, for her belief in herself, and for the world's understanding of what someone from humble beginnings could achieve. As she stood, leaving the piano with her hands still tingling from the intensity of the performance, she felt a wave of relief and exhilaration. The room was still clapping, people were whispering excitedly to each other, and some were even giving her nods of respect, silent acknowledgments of her talent. She had done what she had dreamed of for so long. She had not just played. She had transformed the room, changed the energy, and left a lasting impression on everyone present. In that moment, she knew that her life could never be the same again. The performance had not only silenced doubts and laughter, but had also created opportunities and recognition that she had only ever imagined in her dreams. She had taken the first bold step toward a future where her music could reach more people, touch more hearts, and inspire others to believe in themselves. No matter where they came from, she looked around the room one last time before leaving the piano, seeing faces filled with admiration, surprise, and genuine respect. She understood something profound. This was not just about one performance. It was about courage, resilience, and the power of following your passion. She had reminded everyone in that room that sometimes the most extraordinary talent comes from the most unexpected places, and that it only takes one person brave enough to step forward to change perceptions forever. The applause gradually died down, leaving a quiet hum in the room that felt different from before. It wasn't just the sound of people clapping, it was the energy that lingered, the awe that remained even after the last note had faded. The gala, once filled with casual chatter and polite laughter, now carried an air of amazement. People who had arrived expecting a typical evening of performances had just witnessed something extraordinary, something unforgettable. She rose from the piano bench, her hands still tingling from the intensity of the music. A part of her wanted to savor the silence, to let the moment sink in fully before moving. Another part of her wanted to escape, to retreat to the safety of being just a waitress once again. But she didn't move. She allowed herself to stand tall, to feel the room recognizing her. Not just as a performer, but as someone who had dared to step forward. Despite every doubt, guests approached her slowly at first, unsure how to respond. The initial reactions were cautious, polite smiles, gentle nods, murmurs of approval. "That was incredible," one woman said, her eyes wide with sincerity. "I never expected." "That," she added, her voice trailing off, as if words could not fully capture the experience. A man beside her simply extended his hand, gripping hers firmly, saying, "You've got something rare. Keep playing. Don't ever stop." It was overwhelming. She was not used to this kind of attention, this kind of recognition. Usually she moved unnoticed, a shadow in the corner of rooms like this, serving drinks and clearing tables. Tonight, however, she felt the weight and warmth of admiration. People who had barely noticed her before were now acknowledging her presence. Not for her uniform or her role as a waitress, but for her talent, her courage, and the way she had shared a part of herself through music. The host, who had initially tried to embarrass her, approached cautiously. His smile was different now, less teasing, more respectful. I misjudged you, he admitted quietly, almost embarrassed by his earlier behavior. I thought this would be a joke. I didn't expect that. His words hung in the air, sincere and unguarded, and she felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge or proving him wrong. It was about the validation of her own hard work and courage. A few influential guests, known for their connections in the music and entertainment industry, were speaking quietly among themselves, glancing her way with interest. She overheard snippets of conversation, discussions about scholarships, invitations to perform at private events, and offers of mentorship. It was overwhelming to consider that just one performance had opened doors that she had only dreamed of. Doors that seemed unimaginable even a few hours ago. Despite the excitement around her, she remained grounded. She remembered the countless nights alone at her small keyboard, practicing until her fingers ached, losing herself in the music when no one else was there to listen. Those nights had been filled with hope and longing, but also with fear that she would never have the chance to share her music, fear that her talent would remain hidden forever. Now standing here, she realized that all of that fear had been worth it. It had prepared her for this exact moment. One by one, guests approached, offering praise, encouragement, and opportunities. A well-dressed woman from a local music foundation handed her a card, saying, "We'd like to offer you a chance to perform at our next showcase. You have a gift that deserves to be seen." A gentleman, clearly involved in organizing concerts, nodded approvingly. "Your music, it moves people. We need more of that in the world. Let's talk about making it happen." Her heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and excitement. She had dreamed of moments like this for years, but now that it was happening, it felt almost unreal. She wanted to thank everyone, to hug them, to share her joy, but she also wanted to take a quiet moment to herself, to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. She walked slowly to the edge of the room, taking a deep breath, allowing herself to feel the fullness of the moment. The staff, who had worked alongside her for months, also approached, their faces bright with pride. They had known her as a diligent, quiet worker, someone who always gave her best, even when it went unnoticed. "You did it," one of them whispered, a smile spreading across their face. "You showed everyone what we've known all along." Their words brought a warmth that was different from the applause or praise of strangers. This was the acknowledgement of people who had seen her every day, who had known her quietly but believed in her abilities. Even as the excitement continued, she felt a sense of calm settling over her. She realized that this moment was not just about fame, opportunity, or recognition. It was about self-belief, about courage, and about stepping into her own light, no matter how intimidating or unlikely the situation seemed. She had faced her fears, taken a risk, and shared her true self with the world. That act alone had changed everything. The gala itself resumed its rhythm eventually, but the energy had shifted. Conversations carried a newfound respect and admiration, and the performance had become the topic of every discussion. People who had arrived expecting a simple evening of entertainment were now inspired, reminded that talent and passion could emerge from unexpected places. She noticed small gestures of respect, like a nod from someone who had previously ignored her, or a quiet smile from someone who had doubted her ability. Later, she found herself stepping outside for a brief moment, breathing in the cool night air. She looked up at the city lights, feeling a sense of possibility that she had never felt before. The world seemed larger now, full of opportunities and connections she hadn't dared to imagine. She had taken a step forward into a life she had only dreamed of, and the possibilities felt endless. Over the next few days, the impact of her performance continued to unfold. Emails, messages, and invitations poured in, each one a reminder that talent, courage, and authenticity could not be ignored. Music foundations offered to sponsor her, concert halls invited her to perform, and mentors reached out to guide her journey. Each opportunity was a chance to grow, to share her music with more people. and to continue building the life she had longed for. Amid all the excitement, she remained humble, remembering the people who had supported her quietly along the way, friends who had encouraged her practice sessions, family who had believed in her potential, and even strangers who had offered kind words in passing. Their faith, combined with her determination, had led to this moment, and she knew that the journey ahead would require both hard work and dedication. In the following weeks, she began to perform in small, intimate venues, gradually building a reputation that was entirely her own. Each performance carried the same honesty and emotion as that night at the gala. People listened, felt, and connected with her music, and word of her talent spread. The life of a waitress had transformed into the life of a musician, one step at a time, guided by passion, courage, and the willingness to embrace opportunity when it arrived. And through it all, she never forgot the lesson of that night, the night she had sat at a piano in front of an elite crowd and silenced their doubts with her music. It wasn't just about being noticed. It was about showing up fully, trusting herself, and daring to follow her heart. The experience became a guiding principle, a reminder that dreams were worth pursuing no matter how unlikely they seemed, and that courage could open doors that fear had kept closed for far too long. Years later, when she looked back, she remembered that night not just as a performance, but as a turning point. It had marked the beginning of a life where her talent and passion could thrive, a life where she was no longer invisible, a life where she had proven to herself and the world that determination, heart, and courage could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Her journey continued, with concerts, performances, and opportunities growing with each passing year. But no matter how far she went, she remembered the moment she first dared to sit at that piano, the moment the crowd went silent, the moment she realized that her music could reach beyond barriers, touch hearts, and inspire change. That night was the beginning of everything, and it remained the most vivid reminder of what was possible when someone dared to believe in themselves, even when no one else did.